All right, here we go. Day after Thanksgiving. My belly feels fine. I don't feel as hot about a lot of the things that Bobby Slowik said in his press conference, even though these press conferences humanize him, and then I feel bad about advocating for his replacement. And yet, at the same time, he himself basically argued for the need to replace him in this press conference. It's super weird. Thanks to BetUS for sponsoring this video. We'll get into the Jaguars matchup a little bit, but I'll do my preview either later tonight or tomorrow. Here's Bobby Slowik when asked a question about the interior offensive line. Bobby offered up a curious defense of the interior offensive line. Let's see if you guys pick up what sounds so weird about this.
Across the offense, we got a fatal error somewhere along the way at a critical spot, and I think a lot of times it's easy to see the guys up front. That's the easiest place to see where something falls apart or breaks down. But there are some run plays where our track's off. There's some run plays where, we're not necessarily blocking the edge player like we're supposed to, whether it's a tight end or receiver position. There's some protections that look like issues where a route needs to be different or the ball should be out, So there's a lot of different things.
Yeah, it's a lot of different things. Like that's the problem. It is the offensive line. They're not good. I mean, I know Caserio said that was a bit of a lazy narrative. Okay. I think it's lazy when your offensive tackle is getting his ass driven back into C.J. Stroud in his own end zone at the end of the game. I think it's lazy when the interior offensive line is getting swatted aside or doesn't know what they look like they're doing. Okay, if that's lazy, then call me a lazy SOB. I'm like the drunk guy in the drunk tank in the Andy Griffith show. I'll own my laziness. Some of the things Bobby pointed out, okay, some of the decisions, the tracking in the run game. Joe Mixon himself doesn't always make the decision. There are times, I think, when it looks like Joe Mixon's trying to hit the home run when he needs to go for 4 or 5 yards. I can't entirely fault him because he doesn't get a good, clear picture in front of him all that often in the run blocking. The tight ends and receivers in the run game and in their blocking, yeah, tight ends can't block. The receivers are undersized. They all try. Thank God. The receivers, at least, they try their asses off the block. It's just that guys like John Mechie and Tank Dell especially, they're only going to move so much humanity. Routes being run different or the ball should come out on time. Yes, and I think C.J. Stroud would be the first to accept some of the blame. I'm still operating, maybe I'm a little too forgiving of C.J. Stroud, but because of the environment in which he's operating on, because all these things all over the place are all disjointed and out of place, it makes it a lot tougher for CJ to play as consistently as he did last year. I mean, it's as simple as that. And ultimately, that all boils back on, okay, these guys are not executing. And some of that comes all of it comes back to Bobby Slowik, Chris Strausser, the offensive line coach, all the other position coaches, and then ultimately D'Amico Ryans. We'll get into two things. One, the discussion about Bobby Slowik and whether he should retain his job after the bye week. And two, I will give you some reasons for optimism in areas that they can actually improve. As far as the game this weekend, we don't know for sure if Trevor Lawrence is going to play this weekend. I'm predicting Texans 30-27 if Trevor Lawrence plays. That would give them a healthy over, which is a rare prediction for me, and that'd be twice in 3 weeks that I've done it. The thing I'm concerned about is the secondary with Jimmy Ward moving up to the star position. That's a whole lot of Eric Murray. It's safety. We've seen mental errors in the secondary versus receivers like Brian Thomas. But the Jaguars' pass defense is also atrocious. And I have a hard time thinking that Nico Collins is going to have a touchdown called back for 3 consecutive weeks on a dumb penalty. If there's a team that can do it, it's this team. But I doubt that that's what's going to happen. Over at BetUS, you can get a 150% signing bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits, all the way up to $2,000. Just use that promo code YouTube150. Great way to play the game. Before we move on to the rest of Bobby Slowik, I've got 3 more clips from Bobby Slowik, 2 more clips from Bobby Slowik. I want to play a little montage I put together from Chris Long's Greenlight podcast because he, as a fellow defensive lineman, I think he does zero in on the offensive line a little bit more perhaps than anybody else would. But he's leveled his sights clearly and directly at Bobby Slowik. Here's Chris Long discussing what the Texans need to do perhaps during the bye week.
There's hope for this team, but when they go in the bye week, they got to lock the doors. They got to lock the doors for 3 days, get a coffee, get a bunch of coffees, and nobody have hurt feelings. And some people might walk out of there and never come back. But they have to have hard conversations or they are wasting a year of this kid's prime. Nico Collins has 2 touchdowns in a week called back on dumb penalties. You know, one of them yesterday is in legal motion, Mixon and the receiver in motion at the same time, and like they knew it right away. And you see it on CJ Stroud's face on the sideline. He's just numb right now. There's so many things going on bad on this offense that you have to look at the coordinator, man. But they have to have a conversation about the play calling because the play calling is not good. And I've seen teams work around worse offensive lines, but they're not playing together. And they're doing unsound shit. They're pulling Shaq Mason to pick up an edge guy who's screaming off the edge. He's tiptoeing. He doesn't know what he's doing. You know, you've given up a sack to Devondre Sweat. The guy hadn't had a sack since Jesus was a baby. And you're giving up a sack to that guy. He's 380 pounds. How do you give up a sack to a 400-pound guy late in the down?
Yeah. I mean, you saw how it happened. Devondre Sweat swatted Shaq Mason aside. Now, that was on a series where a lot of the issues on that series where Devondre Sweat got that sack, a lot of the issues that Bobby Slowik will address multiple times in his press conference or did, they pop up in that series because they had a false start by Laremy Tunsil, false start by Juice Scruggs. That took them up to 3-16 after it had been 3-6. So that's a big deal. Hard to convert that, right? Then it's a 4-man pass rush, a lot of deep developing routes. I think CJ could have or maybe should have taken a shot to one of them. But, Devondre Sweat swats aside Shaq Mason. It's ugly. The sum total of everything across the board with Laremy Tunsil, I've got a nice little graphic for you. I'll show you later. It's frustrating. It's really frustrating. But that protection that they were using with Shaq Mason, there's an argument that could be made for using that protection if Shaq Mason actually knew or understood or was aware of what his responsibilities were on that play, and B, if you had actually established a run game, because that's a run action pass protection that nobody bid on. Ollie Gay was just hell-bent for leather right towards C.J. Stroud's internal organs, and it wasn't pretty. But as far as the run game goes, here is Bobby Slowik on the no, I'm sorry. This is this is Bobby Slowik on the run game. And I've got some major red flags here.
Yeah, I mean, we've only had 2 games, I think, where he's played and
He's talking about Joe Mixon.
And hasn't got 100 yards, that being Detroit in this last one. And those, I would say, were probably the 2 games us as an offense would look at ourselves and say we did our worst job in the run game, starting with me and, the schemes we were doing and what we were trying to get done and then how we executed them. Like this last game, just far too often we weren't blocking linebackers. Nobody's going to be able to run the ball well when we consistently have free linebackers.
Right. So the reason the linebackers weren't getting blocked partly is because they were just on the outside zone runs, for one, they knew it was going to get turned back to them. They're slipping blocks on the backside, and it's because they knew that the tight ends, Laremy Tunsil, guys out on the edge, were not going to allow the running back to turn the corner. They were just getting destroyed physically. And linebackers were just slipping backside, and it was easy work for them. They were just sitting there waiting for Joe Mixon when he tried to cut back. The problem with pointing out the Detroit and Tennessee games were the 2 games where Joe Mixon didn't rush for over 100 yards was that those were the only 2 good run defenses that Joe Mixon has faced this year. That's it. The other, Minnesota is the only other genuinely good run defense that the Texans have faced. They didn't run the ball well, but they didn't have Joe Mixon. And what you see is, man, the offensive line gets physically manhandled in those games. They get destroyed. And I don't know if you guys have watched football much this weekend or not, but gosh, watching the Lions in the first half yesterday especially, it's just night and day. The uniformity with which that offensive line moves, how good they are at moving in lockstep, just presenting like an impenetrable wall, and on the zone runs especially. of giving the running back a clear path and a clear picture. It's not always about road grading, but sometimes, man, it's about wheeling on guys. It's about using your backside hand to seal a guy off. The Texans don't do anything like that. And Robert, I don't know if you're talking about me or the other coaches in particular. I mean, at the very beginning of this live stream, I believe I said that, okay, the offensive line coach either has to get replaced or whatever it might be. Or maybe I was saying that in an interview earlier. Yeah, I'm 100% with you. They hired an offensive line coach who's never coached in an outside zone run based system before. And it's not just, there's different techniques. The handwork, the body positioning, everything to do it really, really, really well. It takes a lot of knowledge and coaching and drill work. And if you don't have it, you don't have it. It's one of those things that, hey, this offense is awesome when you execute it properly. But it's like in college, if you're going to be a team that's going to run the press all the time. Lots of teams say, oh, yeah, we're going to run the press. We're going to do it. And then you try to make your guys do that, get your guys to do that, and play with 100% ferociousness all game long playing the press. And teams lose their focus. Teams lose their intestinal fortitude in even trying to go for that. And that's what this offensive line looks like. It looks like there's no actual drill work being done. This one's a little bit frustrating. This is Bobby talking about how he thinks the offense has improved.
Yeah, I'm pretty positive our offense is better right now. Like, I think outside of some abnormal second half situations, like everyone talks about all the bad. Like, we do some incredibly special things for really half to 3/4 of the game. I mean, we're like 4th in points in the first half, and I don't even think we're good in the red zone in the first half. So there's a whole lot out there still. Like, we do some really good stuff, and we have an immense amount of penalties that last year we weren't, I would say, as undisciplined in that regard, like just being willing at times to understand when I have to let up. And we've had a whole lot of errors that we've continued to try to clean up and has led to a lot of inconsistency.
Yeah, again, going back to the first clip, the defense is, hey, we've been messing up in a lot of areas. Can you imagine if your boss came to you and he was like, hey Joe, what's going on with your performance? I'm like, I got to be honest, sir. I'm not good at almost anything. I barely even know how to log into Microsoft Excel. My public speaking skills, I've got poor hygiene. But other than that, I think we've made some improvements. And as long as I can get away with only working the first half of this year, I think we're on to something. I did some really good things. I know it's December almost, and you're worried about these last few months. I would point out that in January through June, I was a hell of a salesman. I don't want to hear about how there's multiple issues everywhere, because it's a slippery slope. It's a toxic cyclone you can get sucked up into if you start thinking about, hey, it's only multiple things in multiple areas that we have to fix and clean up. Like at a certain point, you got to point to the guy that's actually calling the plays and setting the game plans. And we'll get to what they can actually improve on. This is the one thing that bothered me too. He talked about how much they'd scored in the first half, except that they're not actually really good in the red zone in the first half either. Like, okay, so you can score in 2 quarters. We're not good in the red zone ever, and everything falls apart by the 4th quarter. And one of his other answers, he had mentioned that defenses weren't really changing what they're doing in the second half. I would agree with that, because I think part of it is that by the second half, the teams can see what the Texans, A, what their game plan is, and B, what they can and cannot do. In the case of the Titans, there was just zero need to bite on any kind of play action in that game. Their front 7 handled the run just fine, and they could just play good, clean football. The other part of it, though, too, is, look, Tank Dell's got to catch that ball over the middle. You got to not have things called back because of penalty, all of that. It's just multiple things to clean up. Things that could improve. The penalties, we had seen improvement. The disheartening thing about last week was that you have these O-line penalties and these pre-snap penalties, including the illegal motion, that were at home. So no communication issues, and you're making these classic, okay, young team on the road type of mistakes. That was discouraging, but they have cleaned it up previously in the season. They can at the very least clean that up. Let me show you this though too. So the Texans are up there. They're top 3 or 4 in terms of overall, maybe 4th in total penalties right now. I just want you to just to look at the magnificence of this. This is a draft of a tweet that I haven't sent yet. I don't know if I will or not. I'm going to try to have a little bit of a timeline cleanse later and show some Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter highlights on X. But Laremy Tunsil has 12 pre-snap penalties this season. Is that a lot? The 6 highest graded offensive tackles per PFF have a combined 11 pre-snap penalties. Those 6 offensive tackles, I know PFF grades are dicey, but they're all playing better than Laremy Tunsil. It's not just pass protection, it's run blocking, right? And penalties. Those guys have combined for fewer pre-snap penalties than Laremy Tunsil himself. One individual has accomplished so much. It's really, it's impressive when you think about it. And, if you ask, okay, because, every now and then somebody will try to stick up for Laremy and say, hey, he's the 3rd or 4th highest rated pass protector. Okay, if we're going to play the PFF game, you got to look at the other PFF scores too. And he's the 22nd or 23rd ranked offensive tackle on PFF right now. So like just a little bit above average out of the 64 starting offensive tackles on any given Sunday. That's what you're giving a guy the highest paid contract in the league when he got his contract for. Ditto for Laremy, for Titus Howard. Titus Howard is like right around 27th or 28th for a guy that's making good coin. It's not good enough. And as a couple of you pointed out, yes, the offensive line coach, Chris Strausser, also just very much needs to be held to task. But back to things that they can improve at. Offensively, some of the miscommunications between CJ and the receivers, I don't worry about as much if they could clean up the pass protection. I think they've shown progress in pass protection since Juice Scruggs moved to left guard. He's not, I don't think he's a good left guard right now, but there are some things that have stabilized somewhat. And at the very least, the pressure doesn't seem to be coming from anywhere and everywhere all at once. The first the first half of the season, it felt like, you know what SEAL teams do? SEAL teams are really good. Navy SEAL teams, they're really good in other special ops units. They're really good at making the enemy think they're looking at way more shooters than there are. Because the SEALs will, shoot, move, shoot again. So they might have 12 guys shooting, but it feels like there's 36 different people, that there's way more Navy SEALs than there actually are. That's what it felt like in looking at the blitz early in the season when the Texans were really lost and didn't have any answers. It was coming from any and everywhere. I think that's cleaned up a little bit, but it's hard versus the good teams, especially if you're going to rely on play action and max protection and all those things. It's hard if people aren't biting on the play action. It's hard because you've got extra guys in protection, fewer guys out on routes, and the defensive backs and the linebackers are just sitting there. But they have shown some progress in that regard. I think in terms of total team success, the biggest thing I would hope for is that Christian Harris comes back and he's in good football shape somehow, improbably, after 14 or 15 weeks of not having played football. I think there's a chance there. I don't know how much you could expect. You're not going to swap out offensive line coaches this late in the year. I do wonder if a consultant of some sort, like either a Mike Munchak or somebody who's out there and isn't. When Jeff Saturday took over as the interim coach of the Colts, that was mocked and for good reason. The one thing that improved when Saturday took over was that the Colts offensive line started playing more like the Colts offensive line has classically looked. And I believe, ironically enough, I think Chris Strausser was there that year. Saturday's not familiar with this scheme per se as much, but somebody like that, it would be interesting. It would be interesting to see somebody like that. So call in consultants, bring them in, and when you're having your meeting. Shout out to 12 Angry Men for helping with my video earlier. And as far as defensively, the issues in the secondary are as much mental at times as they are physical. And you're late enough now in the season, and Eric Murray is enough of a veteran that I know it can improve. Can they focus on it enough to be nails with it? I'm not sure. I think what you have to hope for is just the continued development of Kalen Bullock, and he's going to get that much more pressure on him now. There's times where you can tell he doesn't anticipate things quite as well as somebody like Jimmy Ward could, but he makes up for it in his extreme athleticism. Kalen Bullock's going to be a big part of potentially looking like the team that we thought they could be. I'm not even thinking Super Bowl or anything at this point. I'm thinking, can you win a wild card game? Can you win a divisional game? Let's set that as the high bar or the high water mark until they get a little further down the road. Let me check some of the comments here. Oh, I'm gonna start doing the boosted comments and donate it to a charity. Tunsil's never been committed to the Texans. All a money gram. You can't be paid that much and be the most penalized. Yeah, the one thing that used to bother me was people would stick up for Tunsil by saying, well, he has this false starts because he's trying to time the snap count. I'm like, yeah, I get why that's happening, but none of the other good offensive tackles do that. Trent, you have to go, I think I did it earlier this year. I think he had to go back like 4.5 seasons for Trent Williams to accumulate as many false starts as Laramie Tunsil had in the first 5 or 6 games of this season. Like, it's not an excuse. If you take Laramie Tunsil's penalties out of the Texans equation, let's say you swapped in a Trent Williams or a Penei Sewell and flopped them over to left tackle, the Texans would be like middle of the pack in penalties. So I'm a little bit torn on that because if the Texans are middle of the pack in penalties with an average offensive lineman who doesn't get penalized as much as Tunsil, kind of your excuses kind of dry up for how it's affected the pass game. But I think also you have to point to, like there was last week, how many of those false starts of Laramie Tunsil have also been involved in killing a drive? Laramie Tunsil's false start took them from 3rd and 6 to 3rd and 11, and then immediately after that, Juice Scruggs gets a false start, and it's 3rd and 16. Tunsil might as well have given up a sack. It's that destructive. So I will do my preview for the Jaguars either tonight or tomorrow morning, and I'm feeling good about this game. Not feeling good about like a healthy victory, but I'm feeling good about the Texans versus the Jaguars in general, versus I'm guessing a stadium that's not going to be all that loud. Thank you to BetUS for sponsoring the video. Please, everybody, like, subscribe, share, tell a friend, see something, say